Imagine you've just died.
Okay, starting off light.
Right. But seriously, just picture it. The monitor beside your hospital bed goes to a flat, solid line.
Right, the classic movie death scene.
Exactly. The doctors check their watches. They call the time of death. The room goes cold. You close your eyes for the last time on Earth. And when you open them again, you're expecting the classic, undisputed binary that we've all been culturally conditioned to expect, right?
Oh, for sure. The two doors.
Yeah. You're expecting either the pearly gates, the endless clouds, like the profound rest of an eternal reward, or
the exact opposite.
Right. Or you're bracing for the fiery pits, the absolute darkness, and, the unrelenting terror of eternal torment.
Heaven or hell, that's the menu.
That is the menu. But instead of either of those extremes, you open your eyes and you find yourself somewhere else entirely.
Somewhere completely off the map.
Exactly. You find yourself standing at the base of a towering, almost unimaginably steep mountain that you realize you actually have to climb. Or maybe you're stepping into a terrifying but somehow purifying fire. Or, maybe you're just sitting in a profound, quiet, achingly lonely waiting room.
Just waiting.
Just waiting. So what if the afterlife isn't just a simple, unyielding binary switch between heaven and hell? What if instead it's a continuous, transformative, and frankly, deeply painful process?
I mean, it's a completely staggering thought. Because we are so incredibly conditioned, honestly, regardless of our religious background, to think of death as a hard stop.
Right, like hitting a brick wall.
Yes, like it's the ultimate finish line where all human development, all our psychological evolution, and, all spiritual progress just immediately ceases. It's done.
Pencils down, the test is over.
Exactly. But the concept we're unpacking in today's deep dive challenges that assumption at its very root. I mean, it suggests that the human journey of growth, that agonizing process of confronting our flaws, our biases, and our deep-seated selfishness, it doesn't abruptly stop the millisecond our hearts stop beating.
And that raises the stakes immediately for all of us, right? Because if growth doesn't stop, then who we are right now is just like a rough draft.
Just the beginning, really.
Yeah. So we're looking at a massive stack of sources today for you guys listening. We've got dense theological treatises, ancient historical analyses, some breathtaking medieval literature, and modern philosophical debates.
It's a lot of material.
It is a lot. And the core mission of this deep dive is to explore this exact concept, purgatory, the forgotten middle realm.
The space between.
Right. We're going to trace how this incredible idea of a middle state evolved from ancient, shadowy burial practices all the way up to highly structured, inescapable medieval dogma.
And more importantly, we want to look at what this concept actually reveals about human imperfection.
Yes.
About our deep craving for cosmic justice, and about our seemingly innate desire for redemption. Because to really grasp the gravity of this, we have to recognize right out of the gate that purgatory isn't just an arbitrary holding cell.
Right. It's not just a spiritual DMV.
Yeah. Exactly. Fundamentally, it is a theodicy. It's a profound, desperate attempt by human beings to solve a massive, seemingly impossible theological puzzle.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, how do you reconcile a God of absolute, uncompromising, blinding holiness with a God of infinite mercy? Especially when you're dealing with human beings who are frankly incredibly flawed, wildly inconsistent, and spiritually incomplete, even at their absolute best.
Right, because how does a messy, broken human being endure contact with absolute perfection without being utterly destroyed by it?
That's the million-dollar question, and this middle realm is the proposed bridge between our messy reality and ultimate, untouchable perfection.
Okay, so before we can dive into the ancient history or the medieval nightmare visions of this place, which we will get to, I need to know the basic anatomy of what we're actually dealing with here.
The ground rule.
Yeah, let's establish the ground rules of this realm. What exactly is purgatory, and just as importantly, what is it definitely not? Because I think the popular imagination gets this wildly wrong.
Oh, it absolutely does get it wrong. I mean, the popular misconception is that purgatory is like a second chance.
Right, like a tiebreaker.
Yeah, a place where you go if you were kind of good but kind of bad, and you have to do some time to tip the scales to avoid hell.
Which is not what the texts say at all.
Not even close. That is entirely incorrect according to the core Catholic doctrine. If we look at the Catechism, specifically paragraphs 1030 and 1031 from our sources, the most crucial thing to establish is that purgatory is not a lesser heaven, and it is absolutely not a temporary hell.
Okay.
It's defined very specifically as a temporary state of final purification of the elect.
Wait, of the elect. So this entire realm is exclusively for people who are already on the winning team.
Exactly. It is exclusively for those who die in God's grace and friendship.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, theologians would say these souls are already saved, they have won the race, but they are still imperfectly purified.
Okay, so to really grasp the mechanics of why a saved person still needs purification, we have to look at how medieval theology broke down the consequences of human sin.
Right, drawing on earlier traditions, yeah.
And they broke it into two very distinct, highly technical parts. Culpa and poena.
Culpa and poena, yes. Guilt and penalty.
Guilt and penalty. Right. So I remember seeing this in the sources and honestly getting tripped up. Because if I'm forgiven for something, isn't the penalty wiped out along with the guilt? Like, why is there a double consequence?
It's a great question, and it really goes to the heart of how this theology views human nature. So culpa is the guilt of the sin.
The actual rule breaking.
Right. It is the rupture in the relationship with God. Now, in Christian theology, that absolute guilt is forgiven instantly through repentance and the merits of Christ's sacrifice.
So the eternal punishment, meaning hell, is completely wiped away.
Exactly. The relationship is restored. But then there is poena.
The temporal penalty.
The temporal penalty. This refers to the residual internal effects of sin. It's the unhealthy attachments to worldly things, the deep grooves of habit worn into your psyche.
Yeah, the lingering damage.
Yes. The damage done to your own character and the ripples of harm you cause to others in the world.
Let me see if I can wrap my head around this, because the abstract theology is, it's dense.
It is very dense.
It's like, okay, imagine I'm invited to a royal wedding.
Okay, I like this.
The most beautiful, pristine, flawless royal banquet you can possibly imagine. I have the invitation. I am on the guest list.
You are one of the elect.
Right. But on my way walking to the palace, I trip and fall face first into a giant, filthy mud puddle. I am just covered in muck.
A very relatable, deeply human disaster.
Completely. Now, because I possess the royal invitation, because the culpa, the guilt of my past actions, is forgiven, the guards at the gate aren't going to tear up my invitation and throw me into the dungeon, right?
Right. The dungeon is hell. You are saved from that.
I am still invited to the feast. But simply out of respect for the king and out of respect for the pristine beauty of the banquet hall, I cannot just walk straight and tracking foul-smelling mud all over the white carpets.
And sitting next to people in your filthy clothes.
Exactly. I need a shower first. The relationship is secure, but my state is inappropriate for the venue. Purgatory is that shower.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. It perfectly captures the essence of poena.
The mud.
The mud is the temporal penalty. God's forgiveness ensures you are in the castle, but his justice and his holiness demand that you be clean before you sit at the table.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, even if the guilt is gone, the distortion in the soul remains, and that distortion requires a grueling purification.
But that brings up a massive psychological question for me.
Okay, what's that?
Well, a shower can be relaxing, right? Or it can be a miserable, freezing hose down in a courtyard. Is this state of purgatory a passive waiting room where you just sit in timeout staring at a clock? Or is it a workshop? Like, is the soul just enduring this mud removal or actively participating in it? Because the sources describe the suffering as immense.
It is intensely, agonizingly active. And what's truly fascinating here is the psychological and spiritual state of the souls undergoing this process. Think about the nature of hell in traditional theology.
Absolute despair.
Right. Hell is defined by hopeless, eternal permanence. It is crushing despair because there is no exit. Purgatory, on the other hand, is defined by absolute certainty and radical hope.
Because every single soul there knows, with absolute metaphysical certainty, that they have a guaranteed ticket to heaven.
Yes. They know the mud is coming off.
Wow.
Their ultimate salvation is totally assured. There are no demons in purgatory trying to drag them down. The trial is over. But the suffering involved in this purification is described by mystics and theologians as more intense than any pain imaginable on earth.
Wait, worse than earthly pain?
Yes, it is an expiatory and hopeful suffering. It's the psychological agony of letting go of deep-seated selfishness. I mean, imagine the pain of having all your self-deception stripped away. Just suddenly realizing with perfect clarity exactly how your selfish actions hurt the people you loved and how they offended God.
That sounds like the most intense therapy session in the history of the universe.
That's exactly what it is. Yet because these souls know this excruciating pain is making them capable of experiencing ultimate joy, they don't fight it. They actively embrace the fire.
They want to shower.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a process demanded by divine justice, but it is ultimately administered by divine mercy.
Okay, the mechanics make a bizarre kind of logical sense when you frame it like that.
Yeah.
But here is what I don't understand.
Okay.
If you look at the earliest Christian documents or ancient Jewish texts, you do not see a highly structured, neatly codified shower before the banquet concept. It's just not there.
No, it's not.
So how did we actually arrive at this dogma? Let's dig into the archaeology of the afterlife for a second here, because this idea had to evolve.
It was a massive evolution, and to trace it, we really have to go far back into ancient Hebraic thought, long before the time of Jesus.
Right.
Initially, the concept of the afterlife in the ancient Near East and within early Judaism was incredibly vague and shadowy. The ancient texts speak constantly of Sheol,
Which is usually translated as the pit or the grays, right? Like a sort of shadowy underworld.
Exactly. Sheol wasn't a torture chamber of fire and pitchforks, nor was it a paradise of clouds and harps. It was a neutral, silent, incredibly bleak realm where everyone went, regardless of how they lived their lives.
Just a holding pen for everyone.
Yeah, it was deeply rooted in ancient burial practices. Death was the great equalizer, a literal return to the dust. In Sheol, the dead were separated from the vibrant communal worship of Yahweh. There wasn't a robust, highly individualized concept of personal reward or punishment immediately after death. You died, you went to the shades.
So if that's the baseline, just a gray, silent waiting room for literally everyone, what changes?
Yeah.
Where does the idea come from that we can actually interact with this realm, or that the realm involves purification at all?
The sources point us to a massive, incredibly dramatic paradigm shift in a specific text.
Okay, what text?
The second book of Maccabees, specifically chapter 12, verses 38 through 46. This is widely considered the foundational text for the entire theological practice of praying for the dead.
Paint the picture for us. What is the context here?
So the context is a brutal, bloody battlefield in the 2nd century BC. Judas Maccabeus, the great Jewish rebel leader, has just led his men in a fierce battle against the Hellenistic forces.
Right, the Maccabean revolt.
Exactly. They win, but they take casualties. When Judas and his men go out to collect the bodies of their fallen comrades for burial, they make a horrifying discovery. Underneath the tunics of every single fallen Jewish soldier, they find sacred amulets of the idols of Jamnia.
Oh, wow. So these soldiers were essentially hedging their bets.
Yep.
They were fighting for the God of Israel, but secretly wearing pagan good luck charms just in case.
Precisely. And in the strict monotheism of ancient Judaism, this wasn't just a minor infraction. This was idolatry. It was a grave, catastrophic sin.
So the assumption would be that they were doomed.
The immediate assumption in that theological framework would be that these men had condemned themselves. The judgment would be final.
But Judas Maccabeus doesn't react that way.
No, he doesn't.
Instead of just writing them off as cursed and damned, he does something completely unprecedented. The text says he takes up a massive financial collection from his troops, 2,000 drachmas of silver, and sends it to Jerusalem to provide for a sin offering.
He literally orders his men to pray that the sin of the dead might be completely blotted out.
And the author of 2 Maccabees praises this action explicitly, right?
Yes.
Stating that Judas was doing therein very well and honestly in that he was mindful of the resurrection. He made an atonement for the dead so that they might be delivered from their sin.
Exactly.
Wait, let's pause right here, because the theological implications of this are absolutely staggering for you listening. Think about what that implies for the very nature of reality.
It changes everything.
If the living can pray for the dead, and if those prayers can actually do something, if a financial offering in Jerusalem can affect a soul in the underworld, it automatically implies that the dead are in a state that is malleable.
Right.
It implies their fate isn't instantly, permanently sealed the millisecond they die into an unalterable binary.
You've hit on the exact theological earthquake that this text represents. It shatters the binary. It introduces the absolute logic of an intermediate state. It asserts that the boundary between the living and the dead is permeable. The living can assist the dead.
That is a massive leap from the silence of Sheol.
Huge leap.
But 2 Maccabees is an intertestamental book. It's not accepted by all traditions today. Moving into the early Christian era, the New Testament doesn't use the word purgatory. So where did the early church fathers get the idea that this intermediate state involved fire and pain?
They looked at what modern scholars call hints or seeds of this process scattered throughout the New Testament. The most heavily cited passage, the one that really becomes the bedrock for the medieval church, is from St. Paul in his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 3.
Oh, I had this passage in the notes. Paul is using like a construction metaphor.
Right.
He describes a day of judgment that will test every single person's life work with fire.
Right. He says that the foundation is Jesus Christ, but then he says, look at how you build on that foundation. If you build your life's work using gold, silver, and precious stones, that work will survive the fire of judgment.
Because it's solid.
Exactly. But if you built your life with wood, hay, and stubble, the fire will instantly burn it up.
So the shoddy, selfish, superficial work gets totally incinerated.
Yeah.
But here is the critical part that always fascinates me. Paul says that the builder of that shoddy work, the person themselves, will suffer massive loss, but they themselves will be saved, but only as through fire.
Saved, but only as through fire. Sic tamen quasi per ignem in the Latin Vulgate. That phrase became the cornerstone of the doctrine. It explicitly suggests a distinction between foundational salvation, being on the foundation of Christ, and the fiery, painful cleansing of imperfect wooden actions. You survive, but it hurts.
And there's another fascinating hint from Jesus himself in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 12.
Yes, the unpardonable sin.
Right. Jesus is warning his opponents, and he mentions a specific, terrifying sin blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. He says that whoever speaks against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven either in this age or in the age to come.
Now, play the logic of that statement forward. Early theologians, particularly brilliant minds like Gregory the Great a few centuries later, latched on to the negative implication of that phrasing.
What do you mean the negative implication?
Well, if Jesus specifically goes out of his way to note that this particular sin cannot be forgiven in the age to come, it logically implies that some other lesser sins actually can be forgiven in the afterlife.
Oh, I see.
Right. Why even mention the age to come if the afterlife is a strictly locked door?
That's a really sharp reading of the text. So the seeds are clearly planted in the texts. But a seed isn't a massive oak tree, and a few ambiguous verses aren't a massive, continent-spanning medieval dogma.
Very true.
How do we get from these hints to a full-blown theology?
We have to move into the patristic era, specifically the 4th and 5th centuries, with the towering intellect of St. Augustine of Hippo. Augustine is the one who really begins to categorize and refine these early, vague ideas.
Okay.
He looks at Paul's letters and makes a stark, terrifying distinction between the eternal, all-consuming fire of hell reserved for the unrepentant and what he calls the purgatorius ignis.
The purifying fire.
Exactly, a purifying fire that saves.
But Augustine wasn't exactly painting a rosy picture of this purifying fire, was he?
Not at all. Augustine believed this fire would be more severe, more agonizing than any physical pain a human being could possibly experience in their earthly life.
Wow.
He warned his congregations not to take it lightly. It was temporary, yes, but it was brutal.
And then, the true catalyst for pushing this idea out of the realm of elite theologians and into the minds of the common people happens in the 6th century. We get Pope Gregory the Great.
Gregory the Great, a pivotal figure.
And to understand Gregory, we have to understand the absolute nightmare that was the 6th century. Rome is basically collapsing.
The context is utterly apocalyptic. The Roman Empire in the West has shattered. The Italian peninsula is being ravaged by barbarian invasions. The Lombards are destroying everything in their path.
Just constant war.
And if war wasn't enough, massive waves of the bubonic plague are wiping out entire cities. The Tiber River floods, destroying the grain reserves. People are dying suddenly, violently, and terribly. Society is literally collapsing around them.
Imagine the psychological trauma of that.
Oh.
You are a peasant in Rome. Your children are dying of plague in a matter of days. You don't have time to perform elaborate penances or secure perfect pastoral care. You are just overwhelmed by grief and existential dread. Isn't it highly convenient that right in the middle of this trauma, the Pope suddenly discovers and promotes a doctrine that says you can still save your dead relatives? I have to play the skeptic here. Was this pastoral care or a mechanism of control?
It's a very valid historical skepticism, but from Gregory's perspective, it was profoundly pastoral. In the midst of that unimaginable trauma, Gregory writes his dialogues. And in these writings, he directly links the earthly penances of the Church to this concept of purification after death.
Oh, so.
He tells vivid, emotional stories of suffering souls appearing to the living, begging for prayers. He popularized the idea that offering the Eucharist, the Mass, could release these souls from their torment. These became known as Gregorian Masses.
So he essentially pastoralized purgatory.
Yes. He offered a profound, desperately needed lifeline to a grieving population. He told them, your loved ones are gone, but you can still help them. The bond of love is stronger than the grave.
That's incredibly powerful.
It is. Whether you view it cynically as a power grab or charitably as pastoral genius, it was exactly what the terrified population of late antiquity needed to hear.
Okay, so we have the theological seeds from Paul and Augustine, and we have the pastoral comfort and the emotional hook from Gregory the Great. But here is where the history gets completely wild.
Oh, it gets very wild.
How do we go from a vague, somewhat comforting idea of a probatory fire floating somewhere in the ether to the highly structured, literal, mapped out, and inescapable medieval machine that purgatory eventually became?
This brings us to a major structural shift in the history of Western thought. The renowned medievalist Jacques Le Goff wrote a seminal book on this called The Birth of Purgatory.
Great book.
It is. He pinpoints a very specific window of time for this transformation between the years 1170 and 1200.
The late 12th century. What was happening then that changed the afterlife so drastically?
Le Goff argues that before this time, purgatory was primarily used as an adjective or a verb. It was a purgatorial fire. It was a cleansing process. It described an action or a state of being. But in the late 12th century, largely driven by the explosive rise of scholasticism in the universities of Paris, the word shifts fundamentally into a proper noun. Purgatorium.
Oh. It stops being an adjective and becomes a specific place. It gets a zip code on the map of the cosmos.
Exactly. It became spatialized. Think about what was happening in 12th century Europe. You have the rise of centralized governments, the drawing of strict geographical borders, the codification of complex legal systems, and the categorization of everything in the nascent universities.
The medieval mind loved structure.
They were obsessed with order and hierarchy. They could not tolerate a vague, free-floating spiritual state. They needed to know where it was, how long it lasted, and how the jurisdiction worked.
It's the ultimate bureaucratic impulse applied to the spiritual realm. And once it becomes a definitive place, the church hierarchy has to officially define its borders and its rules.
Which they did. The doctrine was formally codified at two major ecumenical councils, the Second Council of Lyon in 1274 and the Council of Florence in 1439.
And what were those councils trying to do?
They were largely trying to bridge the gap with the Eastern Orthodox Church, but in doing so, they locked down the Western definition of purgatory.
I read the decrees from those councils in the sources. They established two absolute, non-negotiable points of dogma. First, that souls dying in a state of grace but imperfectly purified undergo real cleansing punishments after death.
Right.
And second, and this is the crucial part that changes medieval society, they decreed that the living faithful can actively help these souls through suffrages.
Suffrages being the prayers of the faithful, the sacrifice of the Mass, and almsgiving. Financial charity could aid the dead.
Now, I look at these dry, legalistic council decrees, and my modern brain thinks, okay, the elite clerics in Paris and Rome pushed this highly technical doctrine onto the uneducated peasant masses, and the masses just had to accept it.
That's the assumption, yeah.
But the sources know something incredibly surprising. Le Goff and other historians point out that the true triumph of purgatory wasn't just that the Pope signed a document. It was that purgatory was a massive runaway blockbuster hit with the common people.
They loved it.
They loved it. Why?
To understand why a doctrine about suffering became wildly popular, you have to look at the psychology of grief, especially in a world where death was a constant daily presence.
I think about how people feel today at a funeral. When someone you love deeply dies, the most crushing, suffocating feeling is the absolute helplessness.
Right.
The finality of the dirt hitting the coffin. You stand there thinking, there is nothing more I can do for them. The story is over.
And purgatory stepped into that exact psychological void and said, you are wrong. You are not helpless. The story is not over, and you have a job to do.
It gave grieving people agency. Your prayers, your fasting, the alms you gave to the beggar on the street corner, these actions could literally reach across the veil of death, pull your mother, your brother, your child out of the fire, and speed them on their way to eternal paradise.
Exactly.
It maintained the bond of love across the ultimate boundary. You were still taking care of them. An incredibly powerful psychological comfort mechanism.
It was revolutionary. It completely transformed the relationship between the living and the dead into an active, reciprocal, bustling economy of grace.
Economy of grace. I like that.
The living pray for the dead to ease their suffering, and presumably, once those dead reach the ultimate goal of heaven, they turn around and intercede for the living who help them get there. It took the abstract theological concept of the communion of saints and made it a practical daily reality for millions of people.
But human nature is a funny thing.
It is.
Once purgatory became a definitive physical place in the official teachings of the church, human imagination wasn't content to just leave it as a blank spot on the map.
Oh, no. They had to fill it in.
Right. If it's a place, what does it look like? What is the landscape? How do they punish you? We have to explore the cartography of suffering, the visions and literature of the Middle Ages. Because when the storytellers got hold of this doctrine, things got very dramatic and honestly very horrific very quickly.
They absolutely did. As the doctrines settled into the medieval consciousness, visionary literature absolutely exploded. You have incredibly popular texts circulating, like the Vision of Thurkill in 1206, which detailed a peasant's journey into the afterlife. Right. Or the wildly widespread legends of St. Patrick's Purgatory.
St. Patrick's Purgatory is a fascinating footnote in all this.
Yeah.
People believed there was a literal physical entrance to purgatory. A cave-like pit located on Station Island, a remote island in a lake in Ireland.
Yes.
Pilgrims would travel from all over Europe to be locked in this cave to experience the terrors of purgatory before they died.
And the terrors described in these visions were intense. This is where we see what scholars call the infernalization of purgatory.
Infernalization, meaning it became like hell.
Exactly. In the popular imagination, purgatory started to look remarkably uncomfortably like hell. These souls weren't just sitting in a quiet contemplative waiting room. They were being subjected to graphic theatrical tortures. Visionaries describe souls being dragged by demons across spiked bridges, plunged into vats of boiling pitch and molten metal, and then immediately thrown into frozen, icy lakes to freeze.
Okay, stop right there. I have to push back on the physics of this, and I know the medieval theologians had to wrestle with this too. Let's look at this logically.
Okay, let's look at the physics.
When a person dies, their physical body, their flesh, their nervous system, their pain receptors is rotting in a grave in the ground.
True.
The soul that goes to purgatory is an immaterial, incorporeal spirit. So how exactly does a ghost feel physical fire? How does an immaterial spirit shiver in a lake of physical ice?
That was a massive, incredibly complex philosophical hurdle that the greatest minds of the era had to overcome. How does a physical element act upon a spiritual substance?
It doesn't make sense.
Well, Thomas Aquinas, arguably the greatest theologian of the Middle Ages, spent significant time trying to construct an argument for this. He and others argued that God could miraculously elevate the physical element of fire to act as an instrument of divine justice upon the soul.
But how? If I hold a flame to a thought, nothing happens.
Aquinas argued it was about constraint. The fire acts as a chain. It essentially binds the free-moving, immaterial spirit to a specific place of torment.
Oh, like a tether?
Yes. The soul, which naturally desires to be free and to ascend to God, is forcibly held captive by this gross material element. That unnatural restraint, that bondage to the lower material world, causes the soul profound, agonizing psychological and spiritual pain, which translates into an experience akin to physical burning.
That is some heavy philosophical gymnastics to justify the vision.
It is very technical, yes.
But I also read in the sources that elite theologians like Albertus Magnus, who actually taught Aquinas, strictly rejected parts of the popular visions. Yeah. He rejected the idea of purgatorial ice completely.
He did.
He argued it wasn't biblical because the Apostle Paul only spoke of being saved through fire. There was no ice in 1 Corinthians.
True. But the common people and the storytellers didn't care about Albertus Magnus's strict biblical exegesis. They absolutely loved the dramatic, visceral, terrifying imagery of souls cycling between freezing cold and burning heat. It made for a better story.
And speaking of better stories, the ultimate masterpiece of purgatorial geography doesn't come from a pope or a scholastic theologian in a university. It comes from an exiled politician and poet, Dante Alighieri.
Ah, Dante. Dante's Purgatorio, written in the early 14th century, is the second canticle of his monumental Divine Comedy, and he completely radically reimagines the entire space and purpose of the realm.
He rescues it from being just a torture chamber.
Yeah.
He didn't put Purgatory in a dark, suffocating underground cavern next to Hell, which was the popular view.
No, he moved it.
He envisioned Purgatory as an island mountain, the tallest mountain in the world, towering up from the ocean in the southern hemisphere of the globe. And he structures the climb up this mountain so brilliantly. I want to break this down because it's a work of psychological genius.
Walk us through the geography of Dante's mountain. How does a soul progress?
So souls arrive by boat at the shores of the island, and they have to climb 7 distinct terraces circling the mountain. And these terraces aren't arbitrary levels of pain.
Right.
Each one corresponds directly to one of the 7 deadly sins: pride, envy, wrath, sloth, avarice, gluttony, and lust. But the punishment on each terrace isn't just arbitrary torture inflicted by demons. There are no demons on Dante's mountain.
Which is a huge shift.
Massive.
The
The punishment perfectly matches the psychological motive of the sin in order to cure it. It is entirely medicinal.
famous literary concept of contrapasso. The punishment fits the crime.
Exactly. Let's look at the first terrace: pride. Think about the proudest person you know. The person who walks through life with their nose in the air, thinking they are intellectually or socially superior to everyone else, carrying this massive ego.
We all know someone like that.
Right. On Dante's Terrace of the Proud, these souls are forced to carry incredibly heavy, massive boulders on their backs.
The physical weight of the stone bows them over, forcing them to look down at the dirt. It physically enforces the humility they lacked in life.
And it's not just pride. Look at the Terrace of the Gluttonous. These are people who consumed and consumed, living only for physical pleasure and excess.
Okay.
In Purgatory, they're emaciated, practically skeletons. They are surrounded by trees bursting with tantalizing, sweet-smelling fruit and crystal-clear waterfalls, but they cannot reach them. They are starved.
Wow.
But they are starved so that they can learn to hunger and thirst for righteousness instead of just physical pleasure. The pain reshapes their desires.
What's so beautiful and deeply profound about Dante's vision is the underlying philosophical takeaway. Purgatory, for Dante, is where the distortions of human love are corrected.
Distortions of love.
Yes, sin, in Dante's framework, isn't just breaking a random rule. Sin is disordered love. It is either loving the wrong things entirely or loving good things too little, which is sloth, or loving good things way too much, elevating them above godlike greed or lust. Purgatory untangles those disordered loves.
And because it's a process of untangling, it's an ascending purification. As you climb the mountain, as you purge these heavy sins from your soul, the climb actually gets easier.
Right.
You literally become lighter. The gravity of sin loses its hold on you.
And what awaits the soul at the very summit of Mount Purgatory? Dante doesn't place the pearly gates of heaven immediately at the top of the stairs. He places something much more symbolic: the earthly paradise, the Garden of Eden.
I was really struck by that detail in the text. Why Eden? Like, why go backward to the beginning before going up to heaven?
Because the ultimate goal of Purgatory is the complete restoration of human nature. It is designed to restore the soul to the pure, innocent, flawlessly balanced state that humanity enjoyed before the fall of Adam and Eve.
Oh, that makes sense.
The intellect is clear, the will is perfectly aligned with God, the passions are completely under control. Once the soul reaches the summit and bathes in the rivers of Eden, it has recovered its original, unblemished nature. Only then, with its humanity fully restored, is it perfectly fit to ascend into the stars, into the overwhelming presence of God in paradise.
It is a gorgeous, soaring, literary and spiritual vision. It really makes the struggle of life feel purposeful. But, well, human history is rarely just poetry.
Unfortunately, yes.
What happens when a beautiful, deeply psychological, spiritual concept collides with the gritty reality of human bureaucracy, institutional power, and cold, hard economics?
It almost invariably leads to corruption and controversy. And in the case of Purgatory, that collision literally tore Western civilization apart.
I want to examine the dark side of this doctrine. Let's look at the economy of the dead and the Protestant break, because this is where the entire medieval system goes completely off the rails and, well, explodes.
To understand the volcanic eruption of the Protestant Reformation, you have to understand how the doctrine of purgatory became monetized over the centuries.
Monetized?
Yes. As the belief solidified that the prayers of the living, and specifically the offering of the Mass, could shorten a soul's time in the agonizing fires of purgatory, it inevitably birthed a massive medieval economy.
Because if a Mass can shorten your mother's suffering, you want as many Masses said as possible. But priests don't work for free.
Exactly. And this led to the creation of chantry chapels. Wealthy individuals, aristocrats, and rich merchants started setting up endowments.
Okay, what's a chantry chapel?
Well, if you had the money, you didn't just cross your fingers and hope your descendants would remember to pray for you. You built an ornate side chapel in the local cathedral, and you left a massive financial endowment in your will to pay a priest, a chantry priest.
And what was his job?
His entire full-time job was to stand at that altar and say continuous daily masses for your specific soul and the souls of your family in perpetuity.
But wait, doesn't that immediately create a terrifying systemic inequality in the afterlife? Like, the rich lord can essentially buy a fast-track VIP, pass through the fires of purgatory, while the poor peasant, who can't afford a chantry priest, just has to languish in the flames and rely on the occasional general prayers of the church.
That is exactly the socioeconomic reality it created. The afterlife mirrored the profound inequalities of medieval earthly life. But the chantries were just the beginning. The real breaking point, the spark that ignited the Reformation, came with the mass commercialization of indulgences.
Okay, we need to be very precise here, because the concept of an indulgence is historically misunderstood. What exactly is an indulgence in the strict theological sense?
An indulgence in Catholic theology is not a permission slip to commit a sin in the future, nor is it the forgiveness of the culpa, the guilt of a sin. Only confession and absolution can do that.
Right.
An indulgence is the remission of the temporal punishment, the poena, that remains after the guilt has already been forgiven.
It's the king handing you a towel to wipe off the mud, so you don't have to stand in the freezing shower as long.
Exactly. The theological justification was based on the concept of the treasury of merit. The Church claimed that Christ, the Virgin Mary, and the saints had accumulated a vast, infinite surplus of good works and grace, a spiritual bank account.
Spiritual bank account.
Yeah. And the Pope, possessing the keys of Peter, had the authority to draw from this treasury and apply it to living sinners or to souls in purgatory to reduce their sentence.
In theory, in the early days, you could gain an indulgence through arduous, pious acts. You had to go on a dangerous pilgrimage to Jerusalem or Rome, or perform intense fasting.
Right. It was earned through effort.
But eventually, the bureaucracy realized that time is money, and money is a tangible, good work. The church started allowing people to give an alms, a financial donation, in exchange for an indulgence.
And that's where it goes wrong.
Very wrong. Soon, it devolved into professional pardoners traveling across Europe, essentially acting as spiritual salesmen, hawking these get-out-of-jail-free documents to fund massive, expensive church projects, most notably the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome.
Which brings us to a German Augustinian monk named Martin Luther in the year 1517.
Now, I want to be fair to history here. The sources note that Luther didn't start out trying to destroy the concept of purgatory. He wasn't a radical from day one.
He wasn't. Luther was a man tortured by his own sense of sinfulness. His famous 95 Theses, which he allegedly nailed to the church door in Wittenberg, were initially an academic protest against the abuse of indulgences. He was protesting the hawking of them by men like the Dominican friar Johann Tetzel.
Tetzel is the ultimate villain in the Protestant narrative.
Yeah.
He reportedly used a literal marketing jingle to sell these things to terrified peasants.
He did.
As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs.
It's unbelievable.
He was emotionally manipulating people, telling them their dead parents were crying out in agony, and for a few silver coins they could end their torture. Luther, as a pastor, was absolutely outraged by this crass commercialization of salvation.
Luther argued that the Pope had no jurisdiction over purgatory. If the Pope really had the power to empty purgatory, Luther argued, he should do it out of pure Christian love, not for money to build a basilica.
That's a fair point.
But as the theological debate intensified over the following years, and as the Pope excommunicated him, Luther's theology radicalized. The reformers didn't just attack the financial abuses, they realized that to destroy the indulgence trade, they had to pull up the entire underlying foundation. They eventually rejected the entire architecture of purgatory.
John Calvin, the other massive pillar of the Reformed tradition, was even more brutal and systematic in his assessment. He didn't just call it an error, he called purgatory a deadly device of Satan.
That is a staggering shift in perspective, to go from the ultimate pastoral comfort to a deadly device of Satan. What was the core underlying theological argument that drove Calvin and Luther to completely reject a dogma that had sustained Europe for centuries?
For you listening, if you want to understand the Protestant mindset, it boils down to one primary, non-negotiable phrase: Salvation by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone.
Right.
If you truly believe that Jesus Christ's sacrifice on the cross was infinitely valuable, that his blood was completely sufficient to pay for all sins, past, present, and future, then the idea that a saved soul still has to go to a spiritual prison to pay off a debt of temporal punishment is not just unnecessary. It is deeply, fundamentally offensive.
From the Reformer's perspective, purgatory diminishes the glory and the finality of the cross. It subtly suggests that Christ's agonizing death wasn't quite enough to get you all the way through the door of heaven. It implies you still have to make up the difference with your own suffering.
Exactly. I can completely understand why the idea of buying your way out of suffering felt like a grotesque betrayal of the gospel to them. For classical Protestants, justification, the legal declaration of being made righteous by God and glorification, being made perfect for heaven, happen instantaneously.
Instantaneously?
The millisecond a believer dies, the Protestant argument goes, God instantly perfects them. The blood of Christ washes away both the culpa and the poena. No intermediate workshop is required. No lingering debt is left to pay. You close your eyes in death, you open them in the presence of Jesus.
It is a profound, diametrically opposed view of how salvation actually functions. And naturally, the Catholic Church could not let that massive existential critique go unanswered. The institution had to respond. This happened at the Council of Trent, which convened intermittently from 1545 to 1563 and became the engine of the Catholic Counter-Reformation.
Impartially speaking, looking at the historical record, how did the Council of Trent handle the Protestant objections? Did they concede anything or just double down?
They did both. The Council of Trent firmly doubled down on the core dogma. They issued decrees reaffirming that purgatory definitively exists and that souls detained there are actively helped by the suffrages of the faithful, especially the acceptable sacrifice of the altar. They essentially said, Luther is wrong, the doctrine stays. But, and this is highly significant, they acknowledged the absolute validity of the Protestant critique regarding the corruption.
They realized Tetzel was a disaster for the church.
Yes. The council sternly and explicitly warned bishops to stop the unrestricted, scandalous sale of indulgences. They essentially banned the professional partners.
Good move.
Furthermore, they ordered the clergy to stop distracting and terrifying the uneducated faithful with uncertain and wild speculations about the specific nature of the punishments. No more preaching about spiked bridges and frozen lakes to extort money. They wanted to strip away the grotesque medieval superstitions and return the church to the solemn, basic theological reality. Purification is real, it is necessary, and prayers help.
So, Western Christianity permanently fractures over this middle realm. The fault lines drawn in the 16th century still exist today. But if we zoom out from the European squabbles, we find something absolutely incredible.
What's that?
The psychological human need for an intermediate state, a place to resolve the messy, unresolved reality of death, is nearly universal across major faith traditions, even if the definitions and the mechanisms vary wildly. Let's look at the Great Divide and explore how Eastern Orthodox, Islamic, and even some modern Protestant views handle this space between death and the final judgment.
This is where comparative theology gets truly fascinating, because you see the same human questions answered through different cultural lenses. Let's start with the Eastern Orthodox Church.
Okay.
Historically, the East split from the Catholic West long before the Protestant Reformation in the Great Schism of 1054. The Orthodox Church firmly believes in an intermediate state, and they pray fervently for the dead in their liturgies, but they adamantly reject the Catholic Latin formulation of purgatory.
What exactly is their main objection? If they believe in purification, why do they reject purgatory?
They reject the entire Western legalistic and penal framework. They reject the concept of pomena, the idea of paying off a quantifiable debt of temporal punishment.
Okay.
To the Orthodox mind, salvation isn't a courtroom where debts are paid. Salvation is theosis, the gradual process of becoming united with God. Therefore, they strongly reject the idea of a created physical material fire, and they reject purgatory as a specific geographical location.
Okay, but if there is no fire and no specific place, how are souls actually purified in the Orthodox view? What burns away the mud?
They are purified through the uncreated energies of God himself. To the Orthodox theologians, the cleansing fire of the afterlife is not a separate torture chamber constructed by God. The fire is the unmediated presence of God. It is his absolute burning love.
That is a profound, beautiful shift in perspective.
Imagine a soul stepping into the blinding, absolute light of God's perfect love. If that soul is unrepentant, deeply sinful, or closed off, that overwhelming light and love feels agonizing. It feels like a burning fire because it is entirely alien to their nature.
Right.
But if the soul is holy and open, that exact same uncreated light feels like profound warmth, illumination, and joy. The purification is an ontological process of enduring the divine presence until the soul is fully acclimated and healed by it.
But the Orthodox tradition isn't just abstract light and love. They also have a very dramatic, highly specific, and widely debated concept regarding the immediate aftermath of death.
Yeah.
The aerial toll houses.
Yes, the toll houses. It's a vivid tradition found deeply embedded in various patristic writings, the lives of the saints, and ascetic texts, though it's important to note its exact dogmatic status is debated within modern orthodoxy. Some view it literally, others metaphorically.
Literal or metaphor, the imagery is pure psychological terror. According to this tradition, after the soul leaves the body, as it begins its ascent through the air toward heaven, it doesn't just float peacefully.
No, it's blocked.
Right, it has to pass through a series of checkpoints, or toll houses, stationed in the aerial realm, and each toll house corresponds to a specific category of sin. There is a toll house for lust, one for anger, one for theft, one for pride, and so on.
And at each of these stations, demonic spirits act as vicious prosecutors. They possess records of every single time the soul committed that specific sin during its earthly life. They accuse the soul, demanding payment, and trying to halt its ascent to drag it down to hell.
Meanwhile, the soul's guardian angel is there, acting as the defense attorney, presenting the soul's good deeds, its acts of charity, and most importantly, its tears of repentance to counter the demonic claims.
It's a trial.
It acts as a visceral, terrifying metaphor for the particular judgment, the immediate, agonizing accounting of life. It emphasizes to the Orthodox believer the absolute, non-negotiable necessity of rigorous daily repentance before death. You do not want to reach the toll house of anger and realize you never repented for how you treated your family.
Now, let's move out of Christianity entirely and look at Islam. The Islamic eschatological tradition has an incredibly developed, highly detailed concept of the intermediate state, known as the barzakh.
Barzakh. The sources say it literally translates to barrier or partition.
Yes. In Islam, the barzakh is the stage of life in the grave. It is the vast period of time between a person's physical death and the ultimate day of resurrection and final judgment. And just like the Catholic purgatory, the barzakh is not a state of passive, unconscious sleep. It is a highly active, deeply conscious state of experience.
Our sources vividly detail the terrifying sequence of events that occurs the moment a person is placed in the grave and the mourners walk away. According to Islamic tradition, the soul is returned to the body in a mysterious way, and two fearsome angels, named Munkar and Nakir, immediately arrive to interrogate the deceased.
They are the angels of the grave, and they ask three fundamental, universally defining questions. Who is your Lord? What is your religion? And who is your prophet?
It's the ultimate high-stakes pop quiz. But the sources note that you can't just memorize the answers.
No, you can't cram for this.
The way you lived your life dictates whether your tongue can actually form the words. And depending on how the soul answers, the physical reality of the grave undergoes a radical supernatural transformation.
If the deceased is a righteous believer and answers correctly, the grave miraculously expands. It becomes vast. It becomes a place of peace. It is filled with divine light, and a window is open showing the soul its future, joyous place in paradise. The grave effectively becomes a garden of rest.
If they are a disbeliever, a hypocrite, or a Muslim laden with unrepented major sins, they fail the test, and the result is horrifying.
Truly horrifying.
The grave literally constricts. It violently squeezes them, crushing their ribs. It becomes suffocatingly dark, and a window to hell is opened, exposing them to the searing heat and the terror of the ultimate fire. They experience what is known as the punishment of the grave.
So again, across completely different theological frameworks, we see this deep, universal human instinct that the time between death and the final judgment is a time of active consequence, of facing the truth of one's actions, and of preparation.
And what's truly fascinating is that this deep-seated human instinct is actually prompting a major reevaluation within modern Western Protestantism today.
Right. Despite the massive systemic historical rejection of purgatory by figures like Luther and Calvin, some modern Protestant theologians and philosophers are taking a serious second look at the necessity of a middle realm. The Christian philosopher Jerry Walls is a prime example mentioned extensively in our sources.
Walls recognizes the fundamental Protestant allergy to the Catholic satisfaction model. Protestants will never accept the idea of paying off a legal debt of temporal punishment. But Walls proposes an alternative, what he calls a sanctification model of purgatory.
Let's unpack the profound difference between those two models for the listener.
The medieval satisfaction model is inherently legal and penal. You owe a cosmic debt, you pay it in the currency of suffering. Wall's sanctification model is moral, therapeutic, and developmental.
Right.
Walls argues that even if God instantly and graciously forgives your guilt the moment you die, the psychological reality is that a lifetime of bad habits, ingrained prejudices, addictions, and selfish instincts aren't just magically, lobotomically erased from your personality.
If God just deleted all your flaws instantly, he would essentially be destroying your free will and your continuity of identity. You wouldn't be you anymore. You would be a newly created, perfect automaton.
Exactly.
Walls argues that to truly, authentically enjoy a perfectly holy heaven, your character needs to be fully, voluntarily transformed. You have to learn to stop loving your sins. And that kind of deep moral development takes time. It requires a process of unlearning and relearning.
And a process of confronting your deepest, ugliest flaws is naturally going to be painful. You have to let go of the ego that protected you your whole life. This brings us to one of my absolute favorite quotes from the sources, from the great Anglican writer C.S. Lewis.
Oh, I love this quote.
In his book, Letters to Malcolm, Lewis gives a brilliant, highly psychological defense of the concept of purgatory. He asks a simple question. Our souls demand purgatory, don't they?
It's a profound, piercing psychological insight into human nature.
Lewis basically argues, imagine you drop dead right this second. You die with all your current petty jealousies intact, your secret resentments against your co-workers, your hypocrisies, your hidden lusts, and suddenly in a flash you are ushered into the blinding absolute purity, perfection, and overwhelming love of God. Would you actually want to stay there in your current filthy, compromised state?
No.
Lewis says absolutely not. We would be horrified by our own contrast to the divine. We would demand to be cleansed. We would say to God, wash me, even if it hurts. I want to be clean before I sit at this table. I don't want to be a fraud in heaven.
It completely shifts the framework and moves purgatory from being a punitive torture imposed by an angry, exacting God to a necessary, deeply desired cleansing demanded by the self-aware, repentant soul itself. The soul wants the fire because the soul wants to be free.
Which perfectly transitions us into our final section. Modern interpretations. We've moved from the literal geographic maps of the Middle Ages with their spiked ridges and physical flames to the deep psychological and spiritual reality of today. How does the Catholic Church, the original architect of this massive dogma, view purgatory now in the 21st century?
The shift in official Catholic rhetoric has been profound, and it aligns heavily with the psychological insights of thinkers like C.S. Lewis. In 2007, Pope Benedict XVI released a major encyclical called Spe Salvi Saved in Hope. In it, he essentially strips away the entirety of the medieval physical geography of purgatory. He completely psychologizes and, more importantly, Christologizes the doctrine.
Christologizes, meaning he removes the focus from a place and centers the entire experience entirely on the person of Jesus Christ.
Exactly. Benedict suggests that the fire of purgatory isn't a pool of physical magma bubbling somewhere under the earth's crust. The fire is the encounter with Jesus Christ himself. Christ is the fire.
Let's explain this concept of the blessed pain to the listener, because it is arguably the most beautiful idea in the entire deep dive. Imagine standing face to face before a being of absolute, unadulterated truth and perfect, unconditional love.
Right.
Just the sheer exposure to that level of truth would instantly illuminate every lie you ever told yourself. It would expose every selfish motive you ever harbored, every person you ever manipulated, every moment you chose apathy over love.
The gaze of Christ acts as the fire. As Benedict describes it, the encounter with Christ burns away everything inside you that is false, everything made of wood, hay, and stubble, as St. Paul originally said.
It hurts terribly because you are being forced to let go of the illusions and the pride you built your entire earthly life around. You are realizing the pain you caused the one who loved you most. But it is a blessed pain because that intense, burning gaze is burning away the sickness, not the patient. You're being healed. The fire of his love melts away the frozen, selfish parts of your heart until you are finally capable of loving him back completely.
This brings us to the ultimate synthesis of why this idea, in all its various forms, persists across so many centuries, so many different cultures, and so many theological divides. It perfectly satisfies two of the deepest, most contradictory human cravings: our desperate craving for absolute justice and our equally desperate craving for infinite mercy.
Let's look at justice first. We know instinctively that simply saying, "I forgive you," doesn't magically undo the damage a person has caused. If a brutal dictator who has caused the suffering, torture, and death of millions of innocent people suddenly genuinely repents on his deathbed, Mercy says he can be forgiven and saved.
But the human sense of justice screams that the scales are still wildly, grotesquely out of balance. He can't just walk into paradise smiling.
Purgatory satisfies that innate demand for justice. It insists that consequences actually matter in the cosmos. Sin is not just casually brushed under the rug by God. The soul must confront the total reality of what it has done. It must experience the weight of its actions. It must be purified of the rot that caused the harm before it can experience eternal peace.
But it also perfectly satisfies mercy. It tells us that we don't have to be absolutely flawlessly perfect the moment we die in order to avoid being thrown into the eternal, hopeless abyss of hell. God's mercy is so vast that it extends beyond the grave, providing a mechanism for us to finish the work of becoming who we were originally created to be. True reconciliation, true character transformation takes time. And yes, it usually hurts. But it's the precise, necessary hurt of a surgeon's scalpel removing a tumor, not the vindictive hurt of an executioner's sword.
It's a profound, incredibly mature recognition of the complexity of the human condition. We are works in progress. Purgatory suggests that the universe, authored by a loving God, has a mechanism to patiently finish that work. Which brings us to a final provocative thought to leave you with as we wrap up this deep dive. Think back to that opening image, the flat line. The monitor goes solid, the doctors call the time of death. We assume that is the definitive end. Your spiritual resume is locked in the vault, your personal evolution is over, pencils down, the test is finished. But what if that assumption is entirely fundamentally wrong?
What if the human soul is far more dynamic, far more resilient, and far more capable of transformation than we can possibly realize in this life?
Purgatory suggests that the journey toward ultimate perfection, the boundless capacity of the human spirit to learn, to deeply repent, and to expand its capacity for love, is so vast that not even the physical death of the brain can stop it. It suggests that the moment you close your eyes for the last time on Earth isn't the end of your growth. It might just be the terrifying, beautiful moment when the real, intense, fiery work of becoming your true self actually begins.
It forces every single one of us to ask, do we view the afterlife as a static, boring, final destination, or as the most intense, demanding, and transformative phase of our journey yet?
Something heavy to mull over the next time you think about what actually happens after the screen goes to black. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive. If you enjoyed this exploration of the forgotten middle realm, make sure to follow and subscribe. We will be back next time with another deep dive into the fascinating, the unexpected, and the profoundly human.